St. Mary's Medical Center, Ohio 9:17 a.m. The halls of St. Mary's were typically calm on weekday mornings. Nurses pushed medicine carts, doctors reviewed charts, and the occasional murmur of conversation floated gently through the clean corridors. But that morning, a sudden, sharp bark shattered the passade, then another, and another. It was coming from Max, a service dog known by almost everyone in the building. Max wasn't just any dog, he was a decorated German Shepherd who served alongside his handler, Jack Reynolds, during 3 combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now semi-retired, Jack brought Max with him to his routine checkups at the VA wing. Max was famous in the hospital for being calm, obedient, and completely silent. He had never barked inside the hospital until now. Jack stood frozen near the elevators, his hand gripped tightly around Max's leash as the dog barked furiously outside room 207. The barking wasn't wild or aimless, it was sharp, deliberate, and insistent. Max's body was stiff, his tail rigid, and his ears pointed straight at the door, as if he were zeroed in on something inside. Nurse Lauren Adams was the first to react. She rushed down the hall from the nurse's station, clipboard in hand. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing between Max and the closed door of room 207. I don't know," Jack replied, confused. "He just started pulling toward this room, and hasn't stopped barking." Max barked again, louder this time, pawing at the floor, and then at the door. He planted his front legs and let out a growl so low it vibrated through the tiles. Several patients peeked out of nearby rooms, startled by the noise. "He's never done this before?" Lauren asked, her tone shifting from curiosity to concern. "Never," Jack said firmly. "Not even in combat zones. When Max barks, it means something's wrong." Room 207 was assigned to Margaret Lowell, a 76-year-old woman recovering from routine knee replacement surgery. She had been admitted 4 days earlier and was scheduled for physical therapy that morning. According to the logs, her vitals had been normal during the night shift, and she'd last been checked at 5 a.m., but now, it was nearly 4 hours later. No one had been in or out of her room since. Lauren tapped lightly on the door. "Mrs. Lowell, it's Nurse Adams. Just checking in." No response. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Max's barking intensified. He began pawing at the door with more force, his nails scraping the wood. "I'm going to get the floor supervisor," Lauren said, already moving toward the central station. Jack knelt beside Max, trying to calm him. "Easy, buddy, what do you smell?" he whispered. Max didn't respond to Jack's voice the way he usually did. His entire body was coiled with urgency, as if some invisible force was demanding his attention. Jack hadn't seen him this alert since they'd patrolled insurgent territory in Baghdad. Within minutes, the floor supervisor, Nurse Miller, arrived along with a hospital security officer. Lauren gave a quick rundown, emphasizing Max's erratic behavior and the lack of response from room 207. "Could be nothing," Miller said. "She might just be asleep." "I don't think so," Lauren replied. "She usually answers immediately. And her physical therapy appointment was 15 minutes ago." The security officer reached for a master key card. "Let's take a look." Before he could swipe it, Max let out a sharp, growling bark that made everyone flinch. It was more than a sound, it was a warning. "Hold on," Jack said, standing. "That's his alert bark. It's what he does when there's danger. Not just a person, real danger. Something's off." The officer hesitated. His training said not to ignore a decorated veteran and his service animal, especially one with such a track record. "I'm opening it." With a beep and a click, the door unlocked. The moment it swung open, Max surged forward, his bark echoing like a siren down the hall. The room was completely dark, curtains drawn, no sounds, no movement. The air felt thick and strangely still. "Margaret," Lauren called out. "It's Nurse Adams. Are you awake?" No answer. Lauren flicked on the light. What they saw froze everyone in place. Margaret Lowell was lying flat on the bed, not moving, no blanket pulled up. Her arms splayed slightly to the sides. Her face had a bluish tint, lips parted but motionless. The heart monitor beside her had been unplugged. "Oh my God," Lauren gasped, rushing forward. She felt for a pulse. Nothing. "Get a crash cart. Now," she yelled. The security officer called for emergency response while Lauren began basic CPR. Jack stood in the doorway, stunned, as Max continued barking not at the patient anymore, but toward the corner of the room. His head tilted slightly, his body angled toward the privacy curtain. Jack followed Max's eyes. Something didn't feel right. The way Max barked now was different. It wasn't about Margaret anymore. It was like he sensed someone else. Someone still in the room. Jack took a cautious step inside. "Is someone in here?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Max growled, low and threatening. Ben took 2 steps toward the curtain. Jack slowly reached out and pulled it aside, and what he saw behind it would change everything. Jack's fingers trembled slightly as he pulled the curtain back. Behind it, crouched between a supply cabinet and a rolling medical cart, was a figure motionless, pressed tightly against the wall, like a shadow. A man, dressed in hospital scrubs. But something wasn't right. His ID badge hung awkwardly from a lanyard, turned backward as if hiding the name. The man's face was pale and clammy, his eyes wide with surprise and something else fear. Max immediately stepped forward, his growl rumbling deep from his chest. The man flinched, raising his hands instinctively. "Don't move," Jack barked. Instinct taking over. "Security. Someone's in here." The security officer and a second nurse came rushing in. The moment they saw the intruder, the officer unholstered his baton and took position. "On your knees. Hands on your head now," the man complied, whispering something inaudible. His limbs shook as if he hadn't planned for this moment, like he thought he'd be gone before anyone noticed. Lauren's voice came from the bedside, cracking with urgency. "I've got a pulse, but it's faint. She's breathing on her own now, but barely." Something was in her fore. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. That sentence cut through the room like a knife. Jack's eyes went back to the intruder. "Who are you?" he asked. The man didn't answer. A few moments later, 2 additional officers arrived and placed him in cuffs. As they pulled him to his feet, the ID badge flipped around, finally revealing a name. James Carter, medical intern. But Lauren's face contorted in confusion. That can't be right. He's not on the roster. That intern was dismissed 2 weeks ago." The room fell into stunned silence. An hour later, the floor was under lockdown. The hospital's administration, security, and even local police had taken over room 207. Margaret Lowell had been stabilized and transferred to the ICU, but she remained unconscious. Lauren and Jack stood together in the staff lounge, trying to process what just happened. "He could have killed her," Lauren said quietly, wrapping her arms around herself. Jack nodded. "He almost did." Max sat obediently at Jack's feet, no longer growling, but watching every movement. Jack could see it in his eyes. His dog had sensed something long before any human could. He wasn't just barking to make noise. He was warning them about a threat. Detective Clara Brooks from the local precinct soon arrived to take statements. She was efficient and serious, and she'd dealt with enough cases to know when something wasn't adding up. She approached Jack first. "You're the handler." "Yes, ma'am." "Jack Reynolds. Max is my service dog. He's military-trained combat, search and rescue, threat detection. And today, he did all 3, she said with a hint of admiration. We reviewed hallway footage. Carter entered through a staff-only access door, using a stolen badge, disguised himself as a current intern, and snuck into room 207. At 7:12 a.m., he was in there for almost 2 hours before anyone checked. Jack's brow furrowed. Why her? Why Margaret? Brooks took a slow breath. "We don't know everything yet, but it looks like she testified years ago in a malpractice case against Carter's uncle, Dr. Preston Carter. He lost his license because of that testimony. We think James came here with revenge in mind." Lauren covered her mouth. "That's sick." Brooks nodded solemnly. "And if it weren't for Max, we'd probably be investigating a suspicious death right now, instead of an attempted murder." Jack looked down at Max and gave his head a soft rub. "Good boy," he whispered. "You saved her." Later that day, Jack sat beside Max in a quiet hallway corner while police and hospital officials handled the aftermath. The news was already spreading fast through the building. Whispers of the dog that saved a patient echoed across floors. Nurses stopped to thank Jack, to pat Max gently on the head. Some cried, realizing how close they'd come to tragedy. Without ever knowing it, the hospital administrator, Mr. Stephen Greer, approached Jack personally. "Mr. Reynolds, I want to apologize and thank you," he said, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. "We should have responded faster. Should have listened to your warning right away. That dog your partner, he saved a life today." Jack nodded. "I've been through enough to know when Max senses danger. It's instinct, but it's trained instinct. He's never wrong." Greer took a breath. "We're launching a full investigation, reviewing protocols, security, patient access. But we'd like your permission to recognize Max formally. Something tells me this isn't the last we'll hear about what happened in room 207. In the days that followed, Margaret Lowell slowly regained consciousness. Her family visited, tearfully, grateful for the strange twist of fate that had spared her life. She had no memory of the event, just a strange dream of barking, growing louder and louder until it shattered the darkness. "I don't know what happened," she told Jack when he visited her, "but I know your dog saved me. I owe him everything." Jack chuckled gently. "That's Max. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, you better listen." Margaret smiled and reached out to pet Max, who responded with a quiet wag of his tail. Her hand trembled as it rested on his head. "Thank you, Max," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up." Elsewhere, police interrogated James Carter. His story unraveled quickly. He'd stolen a badge, forged hospital access, and brought a vial of anesthetic laced with a paralyzing agent. His intent was clear revenge. He had planned it for months. The only thing he hadn't planned on was a dog. a single dog who refused to walk past the door. Max wasn't trained to detect poison, but he was trained to detect intent to sense. Stress, adrenaline, fear, something about Carter had triggered him the moment they passed that hallway. And Max did what no machine or monitor could. He listened to instincts and barked until someone finally listened. Room 207 remained sealed off with yellow caution tape for nearly a full day after the incident. Hospital staff moved quietly in the halls now, their eyes filled with a strange mix of awe and unease. What had been a routine morning turned into something unthinkable, something that could have been tragic, if not for the one voice no one expected to make the difference. A dog's bark. Jack sat quietly in the family waiting area, Max lying at his feet. Despite the day's events, Max was calm again, his body relaxed, head resting gently on his front paws. To anyone passing by, he looked like a tired pet. But Jack knew better. Max had gone into soldier mode back there. He had sensed the threat before anyone else, and Jack couldn't stop thinking about that moment when Max turned his body to the curtain and refused to stand down. It had been just like Iraq. Jack still remembered that day, the one that almost cost him his life. Max had sensed something beneath the rubble, hidden explosives wired under what looked like an abandoned toy. No one else saw it. No one else heard the soft ticking of a triggering mechanism. But Max had, and he'd forced Jack to stop cold in his tracks. That bark had saved them both, and now, years later, it had happened again. Different battlefield, different enemy, but the same instinct. Inside the hospital's security control room, Detective Clara Brooks stood beside the lead investigator and a senior hospital administrator. Surveillance footage from the morning was playing on 3 different monitors. The timestamps showed James Carter entering the hospital at 7:05 a.m. He wore a mask, head low, and used a badge that security later confirmed was stolen from an overnight janitor, who hadn't reported it missing until after the arrest. "We traced him entering through the east stairwell," the technician explained. "There's a blind spot between floors 4 and 5. He used that to change his clothes into scrubs. From there, he made his way directly to room 207. "No stops?" Brooks asked. "None. Straight there." He knew the floor plan. The next clip showed Carter swiping into room 207 at 7:12 a.m., then nothing. The door remained closed for nearly 2 hours. No activity, no visitors. Not until Max began barking at 9:17. He knew her schedule. Brooks said he knew physical therapy wouldn't come until almost 9:30. That gave him a window. The hospital administrator shook his head in disbelief, and no one would have gone in until then. "If not for that dog." "Exactly," Brooks replied. Meanwhile, back in the ICU, Margaret Lowell was slowly regaining her strength. Her daughter, Elaine, stood at her bedside, brushing her mother's hair gently and recounting the surreal experience. "The doctors said it was close, Mom, too close. If Max hadn't alerted them, they wouldn't have found you until it was too late." Margaret blinked slowly, then gave a small nod. "The dog, I remember the barking. It echoed in my dream, like it was trying to wake me." Elaine smiled, through tears. "He was, and he did." Jack and Max were eventually escorted to a conference room where reporters and hospital staff gathered. What started as a simple debriefing turned into something more. A spontaneous, standing ovation erupted as they entered the room. Jack, surprised, gave a humble nod, while Max simply wagged his tail, oblivious to the fame growing around him. A reporter stepped forward. "Mr. Reynolds, did you have any idea Max would react this way?" Jack took a deep breath. Max was trained to detect threats, explosives, danger, stress responses in people. "I didn't know what he sensed that morning, but I trusted him." "You never ignore a soldier who barks like that." Another hand went up. "Do you think hospitals should treat service dog alerts the same way they treat medical alarms?" Jack nodded firmly. "Yes, without question. They're not guessing, they're reacting. It's a skill that's saved lives before, and it's saved one again." The crowd murmured in agreement. After the meeting, Nurse Lauren found Jack in the hallway and gave him a hug. "I didn't know what was going on at first," she admitted. "But when I saw Max, I just felt something was wrong. It was like he was shouting in a language only some of us understood." Jack chuckled. "He's always been that way. Doesn't speak much, but when he does you listen." Lauren knelt to scratch Max behind the ears. "I owe him so much. We all do." By that evening, hospital leadership made the decision to update protocols. A new policy was drafted. Any service dog exhibiting emergency behavior, including barking, aggressive posturing, or unusual focus on a location, will trigger an immediate safety and welfare check. No more brushing off instincts. No more assuming. Room 207 became the focus of discussion. It was scrubbed clean, inspected, and eventually sealed off. Some whispered it should be converted into a memorial space, while others said it should be reopened to remind staff that vigilance saves lives. But no one forgot what happened there. One nurse who had only worked at St. Mary's for 2 months said quietly, "We have monitors, cameras, machines, but none of them knew what that dog knew." Later, Jack and Max left the hospital through a side entrance, trying to avoid the growing media attention. But even there, a crowd waited. People had gathered to catch a glimpse of the dog that saved a life. Children held up drawings. Veterans saluted. Max, as always, remained calm. A boy about 8 years old walked up slowly and knelt beside Max, holding a treat in his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. Max licked the boy's hand and nuzzled his cheek. Jack watched, heart full. Max had seen the worst of the world. Now, he was healing it. As night fell over the city, the lights in room 207 remained off, quiet, still, but it had become more than just a hospital room. It was a symbol. A reminder that sometimes a bark is the loudest scream for help, and when it comes from a dog like Max, it can mean the difference between life and death. The following morning, the hospital was a different place, though the corridors still buzzed with their usual hum. 4 carts rolling, monitors beeping, footsteps padding across polished floors. Beneath it all was a current of tension. News of the incident had spread beyond the building. Local outlets ran headlines like, "Service Dog Uncovers Hospital Intruder," and "Room 207 Saved by a Bark." Everyone knew the name Max now. In the ICU, Margaret Lowell's condition continued to improve. She was still weak, but responsive. Doctors were optimistic, yet cautious. The toxin used against her remained unidentified, though lab tests confirmed it was foreign, something not issued or approved by the hospital. Someone had brought it in deliberately. Meanwhile, James Carter sat in a holding cell downtown, refusing to speak after his initial confession. He offered one sentence during interrogation. Before going silent, "She was supposed to pay. I wasn't going to let her die peacefully." Detective Clara Brooks knew this wasn't just an isolated outburst of rage. She sensed deeper motives. She spent the morning with a forensic team in room 207, going over every inch. What they uncovered next made it crystal clear. This had been premeditated. Tucked behind the bottom drawer of the bedside cabinet, an empty syringe case had been carefully hidden under gauze pads. The vial found earlier had trace remnants of a compound later identified as succinylcholine, a powerful paralytic agent. In the wrong hands, it could stop someone's breathing within minutes. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. The lab tech told Brooks, "He came here to commit murder. He planned everything down to the exit." Surveillance footage showed that Carter had attempted to leave the room 3 times, but returned each time. They later discovered his escape was delayed because Max began barking sooner than he expected. Carter panicked, realizing something was wrong outside the door, and hid, hoping the moment would pass. It didn't. Back at the hospital, Jack and Max were resting in a private room offered by the administration. Max had finally fallen asleep after a long morning of visits, media interviews, and nonstop attention. He deserved the break. Jack stared out the window, lost in thought. His mind kept replaying that moment when Max turned his body toward the curtain. That growl, the change in posture, that shift from alert to protective, it had been like a light switch. Max hadn't just been sensing danger, he had identified its source. Lauren knocked softly and stepped inside. "Hey, just checking in." Jack nodded. "Hey." She held out a manila envelope. "These are the test results." The stuff that was in the 4-line, "It's a paralytic," meant to make her look like she just drifted off. "If we hadn't found her when we did, ... she wouldn't have had a chance," Jack said, finishing her sentence. Lauren nodded. There was a long pause. "You know, we trust our alarms," she said softly. "We trust protocols, monitors, procedures. But yesterday taught me something. Sometimes, the most important alarm doesn't come with a screen or a beep. It comes with a bark." Jack looked down at Max and smiled. Yeah, that bark saved her. Later that day, a formal meeting was held in the hospital's main auditorium. Staff from every floor gathered to hear the administration's report and new safety protocols. Mr. Greer, the hospital administrator, stood at the podium with tired eyes but a determined voice. Yesterday's incident was a wake-up call. He began. "Our systems were tested in the most unexpected way, and they almost failed. But we were given a second chance thanks to Max. From this day forward, any service animal displaying emergency alert behavior will be treated with the same urgency as a code blue." The room applauded. "And beyond that," he continued, "Room 207 will undergo a transformation. It will be renamed and converted into a quiet reflection room, a place where patients, families, and staff can find peace. Because in that room, something terrible was prevented. A life was saved. A system was changed." Tears welled in some nurses' eyes. Others nodded solemnly. The story had affected them all deeply. Outside the hospital, the public response exploded. Hundreds of comments flooded social media, praising Max's bravery. A photo of him sitting beside Margaret's hospital bed, his head tilted gently against her hand, went viral. News channels ran segments on the science of service dog intuition. Veterans groups reached out to thank Jack personally. Max became more than a service dog. He became a symbol. People began sending cards, treats, and even handmade dog vests embroidered with words like hero, protector, and guardian of 207. a local bakery delivered a custom dog-safe cake shaped like a badge. One child mailed a letter that read, "Dear Max, I'm 7 years old. I want to be a dog like you when I grow up." Jack read every note aloud to Max, smiling through them all. Max didn't understand fame or newspapers. He only knew that people were calmer now that the bad feeling was gone. Detective Brooks returned to Jack's room later that evening. She handed him a copy of Carter's confession transcript. "It's chilling," she admitted. He blamed Margaret for his uncle's downfall. She testified in court about a patient his uncle neglected. Said he watched a man suffer needlessly. The board stripped his license. Carter's family lost everything. He blamed her for the shame. It consumed him. Jack shook his head. So he waited. Stalked her. Came in with the plan to make it look like natural causes. Exactly, Brooks said. But what he didn't plan for was Max. That night, Jack took Max for a short walk outside the hospital grounds. The air was cool, the sky painted in hues of deep orange and purple. As they moved past a line of trees near the main entrance, Max stopped suddenly and looked back at the hospital building. Doc Jack followed his gaze. The lights were soft inside room 207, now renamed the reflection room. Through the glass, he could see a nurse sitting inside quietly, head bowed. A candle flickered beside her. Silence, peace. Jack knelt down beside Max and placed a hand on his back. "You did good, buddy," he whispered. "Real good." Max leaned into him, eyes calm and steady, like a soldier who'd just finished a mission and knew it had mattered. The morning after the hospital meeting, the world outside St. Mary's had caught on like wildfire. National news stations ran back-to-back features on the miracle at room 207. Reporters called it the bark that saved a life. And in every headline, Max's name appeared with reverence. But inside the hospital, something more important was happening. A full reevaluation of how the staff treated service animals, especially when they acted outside their trained, obedient demeanor. That included revisiting everything Max had done in the moments leading up to the discovery of the intruder. Every bark, every posture, every signal. Hospital administrators met with Jack Reynolds privately. They wanted to understand Max's behavior, just as an animal, but as a trained professional in a very real way. Jack brought Max to the room where the staff had gathered, along with Dr. Miranda Tate, a behavioral psychologist specializing in military K-9 units. She'd worked with Max and Jack during their service years and knew the dog almost as well as Jack did. "I want to start by saying this," Dr. Tate began, addressing the group of nurses, administrators, and floor security. "Max is not an average dog. His training in the military went far beyond basic commands. He's been taught to detect not only explosives, but stress hormones, elevated heart rates, breathing irregularities, and emotional shifts in people. When he barks like he did in room 207, he's not just alerting, he's warning." Several people in the room looked surprised. "So you're saying he could literally sense something was wrong inside that room, even without visual or sound cues?" asked Lauren, the nurse who'd entered the room that day. "Yes," Dr. Tate replied. "His bark was a threat signal. It's a specific sequence, short, loud bursts, spaced evenly, with high posture and fixed gaze. Max was alerting to a perceived human threat. And not just outside the room. Inside, a shiver ran through the room." Jack nodded solemnly. "When we served in Iraq, Max used that same bark twice, once before we found an ambush site, and once when a local informant got too close to our camp with bad intentions. Both times, he was right." The hospital staff listened, eyes wide, finally understanding the true depth of what Max had done. He hadn't just been reacting to a smell or noise. He was interpreting a situation, reading danger in the air, and responding in a way humans couldn't. Later that day, Jack visited Margaret in the ICU. Her eyes were clearer now, her voice stronger. She greeted him with a soft smile and motioned for Max, who patted gently to her side. "He remembers you," Jack said, smiling as Max lowered his head to her lap. Margaret stroked his fur slowly. "I still remember that bark. I couldn't move, but I heard it. It echoed in my head, like someone calling me back." Jack's eyes softened. That's exactly what he was doing. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "He saved me from disappearing." Jack paused for a long moment, then asked gently, "Can I tell you something strange?" She nodded. "When Max alerts like that, it's not just fear or danger. He picks up intent. When someone's adrenaline spikes from guilt, rage, or anxiety, Max picks up on it. The man hiding in your room, Max zeroed in on him before we even knew he existed." Margaret shivered. "I never imagined I'd owe my life to a dog." Jack shook his head. "He's not just a dog. He's a soldier. And a hero." In the days following, the hospital received an overwhelming number of requests for interviews, donations, and even honorary awards. Jack turned most of them down. He didn't want fame, but when a request came from the state governor's office to present Max with a medal for public safety, he agreed, not for himself, but because the recognition could raise awareness about service animals and their importance in civilian spaces. The ceremony was held in the hospital courtyard. Hundreds gathered, patients in wheelchairs, hospital staff, children holding hand-drawn posters of Max and veterans with their own service dogs at their side. Governor Alicia Monroe stepped up to the podium. Today, we're not just honoring an animal, we're honoring a protector, a lifesaver, a silent guardian who did what? No alarm, no camera, and no policy. Could he sensed danger, and he took action. Max reminds us all of the silent strength found in those who serve. The crowd applauded as Max, wearing a freshly brushed coat and a new red vest, stood beside Jack. A gold medal was placed gently around his neck. Max simply blinked and wagged his tail. After the ceremony, Jack was approached by a young mother holding a leash attached to a yellow Labrador. The dog wore a harness, identifying it as a therapy dog in training. His name's Benny, she said. We're hoping he can help my son with autism. After hearing Max's story, we had to come. Jack knelt to greet Benny, who sniffed him curiously, then licked his hand. The woman smiled. Your story gave me hope that maybe our dog can be more than just a companion. Jack looked at Max and smiled. He can just trust him. They know more than we do sometimes. That night, back at home, Jack let Max curl up on the couch, his favorite place. The TV hummed in the background, airing a segment replaying the governor's speech. Jack scratched Max behind the ears. You didn't ask for this, buddy, but you earned every bit of it. Max yawned, then nestled his head into Jack's lap. For a long time, Jack sat in silence, grateful, not just because Max had saved someone else, but because, in a world full of noise, alarms, and distractions, one dog still listened. One dog still acted, and because of that, someone was alive today. The weeks after the incident at room 207 were filled with change, quiet, methodical, and transformative. St. Mary's Medical Center was no longer the same place it had been before. Max's bark shattered the silence and exposed a hidden threat. Hospital administrators met regularly with staff, security teams, and service dog trainers to implement new safety protocols. Every corner was scrutinized, every procedure reevaluated. The goal was clear. Never again would a threat go unnoticed, and never again would a life be put at such risk. Jack Reynolds was invited to participate in the hospital's Safety Advisory Board. It was an unusual role for a veteran and dog handler, but his insight was invaluable. He wasn't just a witness, he was a teacher. One early morning meeting brought Jack face-to-face with Dr. Ellen Harper, the hospital's chief of staff. She was sharp, pragmatic, and fiercely protective of her patients. Mr. Reynolds, she said firmly, we underestimated the potential of service animals here. Max's behavior was alarming, and yet, so many of our staff dismissed it initially. We have to change that mindset. Jack nodded. It's not just about training, it's about trust. Trusting instincts. Even when they don't come with scientific proof, Max doesn't bark without reason. Dr. Harper folded her arms. We're revising training programs for nurses and security to include education on service dog behavior. You'll be leading some of the sessions. Jack smiled. I'd be honored. Meanwhile, Max became something of a celebrity, but Jack made sure the dog's fame never got to his head. Max continued his daily routines, accompanying Jack to appointments, visiting veterans in the hospital, and resting quietly in his favorite spots. One afternoon, as they walked through the hospital garden, Jack noticed a small crowd gathered near the children's wing. Curious, he approached. There, a group of children were watching a demonstration. A young woman was training a golden retriever to respond to commands. She turned the dog loose to find a hidden toy. One child, a boy with wide eyes and a nervous smile, stood close to the edge. Jack recognized the look. It was the same fear and uncertainty he'd seen in so many veterans. Hey there, Jack said softly, kneeling beside him. You like dogs? The boy nodded, then hesitated. Jack smiled. I used to be scared too, but dogs can teach us a lot about trust. The boy smiled, and Jack handed him a tennis ball. Max wagged his tail, inviting the boy to throw it. Back inside the hospital, Lauren Adams was spearheading a new initiative to train all staff on recognizing service dog signals. We've had machines, alarms, and cameras, she said during a staff meeting, but Max taught us something else sometimes. Instincts are the best alarm we have. She recounted the morning when Max barked nonstop outside room 207 and how that bark saved Margaret Lowell's life. Several nurses shared stories about their own experiences with service animals. Expressing a new respect, we're not just caregivers, Lauren concluded, we're partners with the patients and their helpers. One evening, Jack received a call from the hospital's communications director. They wanted to arrange a documentary on Max and the story of room 27. Jack was hesitant but agreed, hoping the story would inspire others. Filming began days later. Jack spoke candidly about his time in the military, the bond with Max, and the day Max refused to stop barking. But Max sat quietly beside him, occasionally looking up as if he understood. The documentary crew captured footage of Max at work, visiting patients, and receiving his medal. Interviews with doctors, nurses, and even Margaret Lowell herself added depth and emotion. When it aired, the response was overwhelming. Hospitals across the country reached out, asking how they could incorporate service dog awareness into their safety programs. Meanwhile, James Carter's trial began. The courtroom was packed with media and hospital staff. Margaret Lowell was there too, offering quiet testimony about the day Max saved her life. Carter showed little remorse. But the evidence was clear. The stolen badge, the paralytic agent, the attempt to conceal his presence, all laid bare by Max's bark and the hospital's swift response. The jury convicted Carter on multiple counts, including attempted murder and unauthorized access to hospital premises. His sentence was lengthy and he was barred from any medical facility indefinitely. As months passed, Jack and Max continued their routine. But now, they were often accompanied by hospital staff during visits. Nurses and doctors had come to see Max not just as a patient's companion, but as a trusted colleague. Jack began training workshops on service dog communication and safety protocols. Max demonstrated his skills, his posture, and the special bark that had changed a hospital forever. Max teaches us all about vigilance, Jack told a packed room of medical students. About listening with more than just our ears. About trusting those who see what we can't. One sunny afternoon, Jack sat on a bench outside the hospital garden, Max lying beside him. Margaret Lowell approached slowly, leaning on a cane but smiling warmly. "I came to thank you again," she said softly, "and to tell Max, you're my guardian angel." Jack smiled, reaching out to shake her hand. Max leaned into Margaret's touch, his tail wagging gently. They sat in silence for a moment, sharing the quiet that had once been shattered by barks, but now was filled with gratitude. Jack looked down at Max. "We did good, buddy." Max gave a soft huff in reply. With that, the hospital and all who walked its halls knew they were safer because of one dog's relentless bark. Months had passed since the incident in room 207, but its impact was still being felt far beyond the walls of St. Mary's Medical Center. Max and Jack had become symbols not just of hope, but of the power of teamwork between humans and service animals. The story had touched hearts nationwide. Jack was invited to speak at a national healthcare conference focused on patient safety and hospital security. His speech would be the highlight of the event, and he felt the weight of responsibility. Standing before hundreds of healthcare professionals, Jack began. Max's bark saved a life. But that bark was more than a sound. It was a warning, a call for action. We live in a world where machines and alarms fail sometimes. It's our duty to listen to all voices, especially those who can't speak, but who watch and warn. The audience was rapt, nodding in agreement. He continued. Hospitals must integrate service dog awareness into their safety protocols. They're not just pets, they're partners trained to protect. Meanwhile, St. Mary's had established a new division, the Canine Safety Unit, CSU, dedicated to working alongside service dogs to enhance hospital security and patient well-being. The unit was staffed by veterans, trainers, and medical professionals who understood the unique bond between handler and dog. Jack was named as an honorary advisor. Max was its first ambassador. Together, they helped design training modules that taught hospital staff how to interpret canine signals, recognize emergency behaviors, and respond appropriately. Lauren Adams, now promoted to head of nursing staff training, spearheaded workshops where nurses practiced recognizing service dog behaviors. "We learned that ignoring a dog's unusual behavior isn't just careless, it's dangerous," she told a group of trainees. Max's alert could have been overlooked if not for Jack's experience and courage. The program was hailed as innovative, drawing interest from hospitals across the country. Back at home, Jack noticed a change in Max. Though he remained calm and obedient, there was a subtle shift to quiet confidence and attentiveness that seemed deeper than before. Max was aging, but his spirit was as sharp as ever. One afternoon, during a routine visit to a local veteran center, Max and Jack were approached by a young veteran named Eric. Eric had recently returned from deployment and struggled with PTSD. "I heard about Max," Eric said softly. "I want a dog like him to help me." Jack smiled gently. "Dogs like Max don't just help with PTSD, they understand it. If you want, I can introduce you to some programs that train service dogs to work with veterans." Eric's eyes brightened. "That would mean everything to me." Jack clapped him on the shoulder. "It's a long journey, but it's worth every step." At the hospital, the memory of room 27 lingered. The reflection room had become a quiet place for families to honor resilience and recovery. Soft lighting, plants, and comfortable chairs replaced the sterile environment. On one wall, a plaque, "Read, in honor of the life saved by courage, vigilance, and the bark that changed everything." Visitors often left flowers or small tokens. Nurses sometimes paused to sit and reflect. One day, a group of school children on a hospital tour stopped by, fascinated by the story. A nurse explained how Max's bark had saved a life and how service dogs worked. A little girl asked shyly, "Can I be a dog whisperer when I grow up?" The nurse smiled. "With kindness and patience, you can be anything." Meanwhile, Jack and Max's story inspired a children's book, written by a local author who had visited the hospital during the aftermath. Titled Max's Bark, the Dog Who Saved a Life, the book illustrated Max's bravery in bright, hopeful colors, simplifying the story for young readers. Jack was invited to a book reading at a community center. He read aloud to a crowd of children and parents, showing pictures of Max in his vest, the hospital, and room 207. Children listened intently, wide-eyed with admiration. At the end, a small boy tugged Jack's sleeve. "I want a dog like Max." Jack knelt down. "They're out there, waiting to be heroes." As spring blossomed, Jack and Max found themselves back at St. Mary's for a special event, celebrating service dogs. The event raised funds for training, programs, and honored other dogs working alongside veterans and patients. Max was the guest of honor. The mayor presented him with a ceremonial collar engraved with his name and title, Hero of Room 207. Jack stood proudly as Max received the accolade, but the real reward was the joy in the eyes of patients, families, and staff who understood the story behind that bark. One nurse approached Jack quietly. "Max gave us a second chance. He reminded us why we do what we do." Jack smiled. "He reminds me every day." As evening fell on the event, Jack and Max walked outside beneath a sky streaked with stars. The city hummed quietly around them, but in that moment, it felt like a world filled with hope and healing. Jack knelt and scratched Max behind the ears. "You've done more than bark, buddy. You've changed lives." Max rested his head against Jack's knee, eyes closing in contentment. And though Max's muzzle was graying, his heart remained steadfast, a reminder that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest power. The years that followed were a testament to the lasting impact of that fateful morning at St. Mary's Medical Center. Max, now a senior dog with a streak of silver around his muzzle, had become more than a service dog. He was a legend, a guardian, spirit of the hospital. Jack Reynolds had retired from active service dog handling but remained a vital part of the hospital community. His work educating staff, veterans, and the public about service animals continued unabated. Every corner of St. Mary's bore the mark of change, inspired by Max's bark. The reflection room, once room 207, had transformed into a sanctuary of hope. Patients and families gathered there for moments of quiet reflection, meditation, and healing. Large mural adorned one wall, a portrait of Max, majestic and alert, painted by a local artist commissioned by grateful hospital staff. At the mural's base was a plaque inscribed with words that had become a mantra throughout the hospital. "Sometimes, courage speaks without words. Sometimes, a bark is louder than alarms. We honor the watchful eyes and listening hearts that protect us all." One crisp autumn morning, Jack was invited back to the hospital for a ceremony honoring Max's contributions as he approached his 12th birthday, a venerable age for a service dog. The courtyard was filled with hospital staff, patients, veterans, families, and even children who had grown up hearing the story. Governor Alicia Monroe returned to present Max with a Lifetime Achievement Award, the first of its kind in the state, recognizing service animals' roles in public safety. Jack stood beside Max, holding his leash tightly. "This dog saved a life and changed a hospital," he said in his speech. But Max's story is about more than that one day. It's about the bond between humans and animals, about listening when it's hardest, and about the courage to act, even when no one else will. Margaret Lowell was there, sitting in a wheelchair but radiant with gratitude. She approached Jack after the ceremony, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you both," she said softly. "Max didn't just save my life, he gave me a future." Jack smiled gently. "He was just doing his job." Margaret shook her head. "He was doing much more." Over the years, Max's legacy extended beyond the hospital walls. St. Mary's collaborated with service dog organizations to create new training programs, sharing knowledge and resources nationwide. Veterans received support finding their own four-legged partners. Hospitals across the country adopted policies inspired by the SS Youth canine safety unit that Jack had helped shape. Jack often reflected on the journey. From a war zone to a hospital hallway, Max's bark had been a constant guardian, sound a reminder that sometimes the smallest signals carry the greatest power. One evening, Jack sat by the fireplace at home. Max curled up at his feet, breathing slow and steady. He pulled out a photo album filled with memories, pictures of Max in uniform, at the hospital, with children, with veterans. Jack whispered, "You've been my partner through everything, Max, from battlefields to hospital halls. You've saved lives, lifted spirits, and changed how the world listens." Max lifted his head briefly, eyes meeting Jack's, then rested again. Fast Max's health gently declined. The hospital community rallied around Jack. A farewell celebration was organized, a quiet gathering of those whose lives Max had touched. The reflection room held a ceremony where nurses, doctors, veterans, and families shared stories of courage, resilience, and gratitude. Max, wearing his ceremonial collar and red vest, received one last standing ovation. In his final days, Jack stayed by Max's side, honoring the bond forged. Over years of service, he spoke softly to his loyal companion. "Rest easy, old friend. You've done more than any dog could ever do." Max's eyes closed slowly, a peaceful expression on his face. His bark was silent now, but its echo lived in the hospital, in the hearts of those he saved, and in the legacy of vigilance and compassion he left behind. The story of Max, the service dog who barked nonstop at room 27, uncovering a hidden threat, remained a powerful reminder. Sometimes, it takes a bark to save a life. Sometimes, the quietest heroes make the loudest impact. And sometimes, listening closely is all it takes to change the world.